Thank you so much for being here, for coming out on a rainy Los Angeles day, which is so unusual, for foregoing the football game that I know a lot of people were very excited about, and for your patience in dealing with the UCLA challenging parking. I'm Vicki Goodman, and on behalf of the Friends of the Semel Institute for Neuroscience and Human Behavior at UCLA and the Resnick Neuropsychiatric Hospital Board of Advisors, we are honored to host this premiere screening of Junction, the new film written, directed, and produced by actor Bryan Greenberg. Bryan also stars in the film along with Sophia Bush, Chung, Griffin Dunne, and many more. The film has a runtime of 1 hour and 38 minutes, and immediately following the film, one of our very favorite faculty members, Dr. Tim Fong, who is a professor of psychiatry at the Semel Institute, board certified in both adult and addiction psychiatry, is here to share his knowledge and expertise about addiction with us and also take some questions from the audience. We had planned to have cast members from the film here to participate on the panel, but 2 are sick with the flu, and 1 is not sure she'll get here in time, but we have Tim, and that's really all we need. And I also really have to thank Tim because he had tickets for the Pantages today, and we asked him if he would consider changing them so he could be with us here today. So big round of applause once again. So for those of you who are here with us for the first time, this program is part of our Open Mind Community Lecture and Film Series that brings together thought leaders at the intersection of culture and science for meaningful and relevant conversations about mental health issues. Many of our programs now since the pandemic are on Zoom, and you can find a schedule of all of our upcoming events on our website, friendsofthesemelinstitute.org. And speaking of upcoming events, I would like to share some very special ones with you today. On Sunday, February 25th, our Teen Advisory Council, which began at the end of 2022 in response to the Surgeon General's advisory that there is a mental health crisis among our youth, they are sponsoring their inaugural Gen Z Wellness Summit here at UCLA. The event is free for high school students and college students and will feature mental health advocates, student mental health advocates, influencers, athletes, and celebrities, all in conversation with Semel Institute faculty. There will be performances by Gen Z entertainers and spoken word artists as well. Some participants include Lily Reinhart, Meta Sandiford Artest, the Olympic skater Gracie Gold, and many more. Again, visit our website, friendsofsemelinstitute.org. Another exciting event on our calendar is the Open Mind Film Festival for high school students, now in its 4th year, and for the first time in person right here at the James Bridges Theater on Sunday, April 21st at 1 p.m. High school students from around the country submit short films about mental health issues, 5 minutes or less, and they are the top 10 films that are judged by a panel of experts will be screened at the festival, and the top 3 films, the young filmmakers will receive very generous cash prizes. The deadline for submissions is March 22nd. If you know any students that are interested in film and want to express themselves about a mental health issue, please encourage them to send their films in for consideration. And now let's take a very quick look at the 1-minute trailer that features clips from last year's finalists' films. Amos, hit it. As you can see, these are extraordinary, powerful films about very deep feelings. And I can't wait to see the films that are submitted this year. And I hope that you'll all join us on April 21st for the Open Mind Film Festival right here. And before I continue, I just want to recognize in the audience who you must have just slipped in because I did not see you before, and that's Dr. Helena Hansen, who is the interim director of the Semel Institute and the interim director of the Department of Psychiatry here at UCLA. Couldn't sneak by me. I also wanted to add that the film festival last year was hosted by none other than Bryan Greenberg, and this year will be hosted by actor James Lafferty. Now back to our feature film. Unfortunately, Bryan Greenberg is not able to join us in person today to introduce his film because he was called back to freezing cold Chicago to continue filming a new TV series that he is starring in. I know it's a little disappointing, but we've got the next best thing, and that is a video message from Bryan. Let's take a listen. Amos? I wish that Bryan Greenberg was here so we could thank him in person for this very powerful, amazing film that really sheds light on how innocent people get caught up in this opioid crisis and addiction. And it's also, I think, helped give us some empathy for those who struggle with addiction. So thank you. I am honored to welcome and we actually do have a panel. So those of you who stayed, we really have an added bonus for you. So first of all, the director of the Semel Institute is here with us, Dr. Helena Hansen. She's a professor of psychiatry and of anthropology. And she's also the interim director of the Semel Institute and the interim director of the Department of Psychiatry. So please welcome Dr. Helena Hansen. And you made it. I'm so excited. Actress Sophia Bush is here. Sophia starred as Brooke Davis in the WBCW drama series One Tree Hill and as Erin Lindsay in the NBC police procedural drama series Chicago PD. Welcome, Sophia. She's now the co-host on the Drama Queens podcast. And last but not least, we have Dr. Tim Fong. He's got a huge fan club here. Dr. Fong is a professor of psychiatry. He is board certified in adult and addiction psychiatry. He's the attending physician in the UCLA Addiction Psychiatry Clinic, and he specializes also in gambling addiction, but not shopping addiction.
Thank you, Vicki. Thank you, Wendy, and thank you everyone for coming out on a beautiful Sunday. Let's all just take a deep breath. Woo! Thank you, Sophia. Is it Sophia? Sophia.
Yes, Sophia.
Sophia for coming out. And Dr. Hansen, who is actually my boss. So I'm going to be on my best behavior here today, and thank you for the audience for that. I just want to say that was really, really unbelievable, right? And my first line, I have a couple overviews. I have some questions for you, but I'm first going to open it up here right now. It feels like Crash meets Succession meets The Wire with an ending like Seven. So that's my review. So
I'm going to scoop back.
That's actually a big part of it. But I do have a couple general thoughts on it, and I want to hear about your experience doing this work. Because, again, we go to the movies to escape, right? Mm-hmm. We go to the movies for Nicole Kidman to tell us, and here they are, right? I did, and I love the movies. And when I think about what the movies can do for our field in addiction and mental health, compared to what I can do if I write an article or I say a few things, very few people see that. but millions of people starting this week will see this movie. And hopefully that will change and educate millions of people's minds about what addiction is, what recovery is, and where our country has come from. 20 years ago when I was in medical school, if someone had pitched an idea for a movie like this, they would have been like, no, there's no way that's going to be made. Absolutely, right? So this is classified as a docudrama, as a thriller, but it really is a humanistic look at everything. I thought very, very, very well done and realistic. I have some comments about all the other characters, but just a couple of things in general stand out for me. Just the realism of the desperation that the characters go through. The things that I see every day, this is what I've lived in the last 20 years as an addiction psychiatrist. But I only get to see people who show up into my office or on our Zoom. We don't get to see what happens here. Like your character driving, the desperation, the taking him in. Should I help him? Should I not? I love him, but I'm scared for him. And the son. And that's so powerful because that's not what we get to see as healthcare providers, but it's what the patients and families are going through. So thank you for depicting that. So I just want to kind of open it up to kind of hear your thoughts about the movie, what it was like for you to film it, and if you could give us all kind of a sense of your main takeaway point you'd like the audience to leave with the theater when they see it for the first time. And why don't you start with that, and I'll have some other things from Dr. Hansen.
So really, like, no pressure questions. Got it. Thank you all, pardon me, so much for coming out. You know, it means a lot to have people gather for subject matter like this and for something that is really so profoundly important to so many of us who care about public health, and, you know, certainly to one of my oldest friends in the world, Bryan, who wrote and directed and starred in this movie. I was like, are you Clint Eastwood? Like, sir, what is happening? He crushed it and really wishes he could be here with all of you today, but he's filming something actually in Chicago currently, so that's why you got me instead. The movie, I really liked what you said, that it feels like, at least for us, the references we talked about when making it, you nailed all of them. You know, the notion of a film that affected so many of us when it came out, like Crash, that showed you all these disparate storylines and how they were actually connected in the end. The realism of a series like The Wire, the realism of the opioid epidemic is undeniable at this point. It's something that affects so many millions of people. And I do think that the power of a story that can show you a little bit more of the complete picture of who someone is. So they're not just a statistic. They're not just person number, fill in the blank of how many millions of people struggle with this. You see not only their personal crisis, but the ripple effects that it causes through families and generations. And we get to humanize something that very often we look at mathematically, and that felt incredibly important to us, really making sure that you got to see the life behind a statistic or an idea, and it means a lot, you know, particularly that it resonated with, you know, folks like yourself.
Yeah. What was it like the first table read? When you read through this and you started to prepare for a character like this?
Oh, indie movies don't have the budget for table reads. To be clear, like when you're hustling to figure out how to make a film and raise the funds to get it done, a lot of the things that you desire as a team kind of go out the window. You know, the luxury of doing a play is that you have weeks and weeks of rehearsal, and very often on projects like this, you just show up and you have a day. I mean, I showed up with 2 suitcases full of clothes because we had no time to do a fitting for me. And I was like, I'll just bring all my own stuff. You can use it or not. Everybody really, in our industry, jokes, like, you don't make independent movies because you're going to pay your mortgage on them. You make them because you really believe in the subject matter. And everybody hustles and everybody shows up. And even on the days that I was filming, we wound up wrapping early one night when we did all of the basketball sequences with the kids, because kids can only work so many hours. And then we went back into the sort of back room of the gym, and we did all of our gallery art. So we had like a pop-up photo studio, and we were taking all the pictures that eventually went on the posters and everything. And then we were done, and Bryan looked at me and was like, you're leaving in the morning. Like, should we shoot something right now? And I was like, yeah, what do you want to do? And we just wrote another scene and like threw a camera guy in the car and went and did it. And it's the thing I love the most about making movies with friends is that, you know, you have your ride or die people and you're like, you want to do something we're not supposed to do? I do too. And, you know, we figured it out because we had 90 minutes left that we could use some of our crew. And I thought it actually wound up being something really important to have this woman looking for her person, because you can have your family torn apart by so many things, and addiction certainly can do such incredible damage to, you know, a family and to a marriage. But it doesn't mean you don't love the person. And the boundaries that people sometimes put up to protect themselves are things that I think on screen can be really beautiful to explore. How do you set a boundary because intellectually you know you should, but what about emotionally, how you feel? And I think that's actually part of the struggle that I've learned about for people who suffer from addiction, the way that it changes your brain chemistry. You know you need to stop, but you physically cannot. And there is something in the dynamic, I think, of loving someone the way Allison loves him that, in a way, mirrors his own struggle with pharmaceuticals.
That's so well said. And again, a movie like this, I don't want people to walk away afraid. I don't want people to walk away paranoid that they're being monitored or the feds are after them and things like that, right? That's super important because fear, of course, leads to hate and leads to anger and leads to suffering. You know where I get that from. But it's so crucial because these characters, and Bryan said in the opening sequence about this is a character study. It's not good or bad. It's not black or white. Shades of gray. Shades of gray. And that's what makes the opioid crisis and everyone involved with it so difficult because we're all on both sides of the equation, shades of gray. So do not, and that was the first time I saw this at home, I said, I don't want this to be a fear piece. And it's not. It's a piece that should stimulate, inspire, yes, cause you some anxiety, but also give you some hope is that how could we have done differently across all those three characters? I have some ideas there. But first, I have to hear Dr. Hansen. Again, she's the chair. Dr. Hansen is also an addiction psychiatrist and has been doing this sort of work for as long as I've been in the career as well. So what are your thoughts on the film, and what questions do you have for Sophia?
I'm just so thrilled to see this film. It does so many things well, and the two of you already began that list. We really experienced the anxiety and the entrapment, that fear, that sense that there just isn't a way out of many of the characters. We also see the human side, as you mentioned, that these are people with really rich lives, and that the opioids that they've gotten involved with directly or indirectly are coming into a very complex life with a lot of difficult decisions. The other thing that the film did that I don't know that we've commented on yet explicitly is it violated a lot of our stereotypes about who is addicted, who's susceptible to addiction. And it turns out that's a really important piece of the story of how the corporate manufacturers of the opioids, the new generation of opioids that have caused the crisis, really got around the regulatory bodies that would otherwise have caught earlier what they were doing. So, and my last comment is directly related to the fact that I am a social scientist and addiction psychiatrist. So I have a PhD in anthropology that I pursued because I was so struck in my early years of clinical training. This was back in the early 90s under the HIV and AIDS pandemic, which shared a lot of qualities with the opioid crisis that we're facing right now. In those early days, I really saw firsthand, working with HIV, people were organizing to get more investments and attention to HIV services and research, what a huge role systemic factors play. So, you know, in this film, one thing I really want to commend this film for doing is it really also points to, if you're watching and listening carefully, It points to the profit motive built into our current healthcare system. It points to the FDA and its failures and regulation. It points to the vulnerability to political corruption of our system with such outsized economic power that healthcare industries, including pharmaceutical manufacturers, have for-profit healthcare. By the way, the U.S. is a complete outlier in how we pay for healthcare and how we regulate and politically structure healthcare. So we are by far the most privatized and for-profit form of healthcare among industrialized nations. We spend the most on healthcare of any country in the entire world, and we get the worst health outcomes of any industrialized country, any of the 17 peer countries. We're the only country without some form of universal health care. The opioid crisis is really front and center of the story of the impact of that kind of system. So this film also points to that, and shows in a humanizing, behind-the-scenes story how people of very many different backgrounds can be drawn into that system and not be able to escape. And the way that it harms people at all levels. I thought that the ending of the film, that the son of one of the major opioid manufacturer CEOs was also affected and died as a result. I just thought that was a beautiful commentary on how this system ends up harming everyone, including those that on the surface of it seem to be profiting from it. So I just want to commend the film because it captured the complexities on all of those levels. And really, thank you for your performance. You've really brought it home.
Sophia, there were cutaways of some folks in the film. Did you happen to know if those were real patients of opioid use disorder, or were those actors that were embedded in there? And there was a couple, maybe about 15, 20 seconds of face montages.
Yeah, I know that there were discussions about opening those performance slots in the film to folks who'd really been affected. I don't know what the final numbers wound up being, and I don't know. I'm like, am I going to violate someone's HIPAA protection laws if I talk about it? I don't really know what I'm allowed to say, but I want to, as delicately as possible, also answer your question and say that
it felt very real,
yes,
and it felt like
authentically representing people.
You can,
yeah, it was of paramount importance to Bryan and everyone involved.
So again, take us through your experience in doing this work. What's probably the most surprising element about the opioid crisis you've learned from doing this project?
I think, really, to your point, the realizing the depth and the breadth of the crisis, and also understanding how stereotypes are so harmful to people who need help. The importance of piercing the veil, if you will, really helping to do away with some of those ideas and set the record straight to create some awareness in terms of who is performing and who is addicted and whose families are affected, felt like it mattered, because these ideas that get perpetuated, out in the world, when you realize how insidious they are, when you realize that they really are, those stories are told to make sure folks aren't held accountable, and that folks who have been historically harmed remain historically harmed. So there's a lot to take in. There's a lot that once you see it, you really can't unsee it, nor should you. And I think for us, it's why, it feels even more meaningful perhaps than the average experience of signing up for a project or a role. You really, for us as actors, we really thought a lot about who we were carrying into the rooms that we were representing on screen. And it's nice when, you're not just doing something because you love it or believe in it, but because you think that it matters to someone, and that it might allow someone to feel seen or to feel like their story's finally being told. And that's a pretty profound feeling when, your job is essentially grown-up make-believe. So, you go to work on days like this and you just really know that we may not be curing cancer, but that this is going to matter to people that are trying to help other people.
Now, I've seen a lot of opioid shows. I've seen a lot of opioid movies. I've seen a lot of content. I watch a lot of YouTube. I watch a lot of TikTok. And again, I think one of the most powerful influences is the idea that this film could literally save some lives, literally get some folks. And I'll just put my hat on for a couple critiques, if you want to take back to Bryan, over some things I want to highlight for everyone. And you go through all the character studies, and you start with Michael. And here's the guy who, surgery, takes some opioids and develops physical dependence, which turns into opioid use disorder. Not the same. And a lot of times people say, well, how long does it take from taking the first pill do I develop physical signs of symptoms? It can be a matter of a few weeks. It could be a matter of several months. But I thought that was really important that they mentioned that. It was a surgery. And then it was too much access to pills. And then it was not enough support. And in his case, not enough asking for help, the shame you can feel from Michael. The shame of a man whose father has his empire and who built his business and supported it and going through a divorce. So you really feel that shame. So you wish he had gotten help sooner. When I think about the doctor's case, Dr. Davis, here's a gynecologist who went into pain medicine, who clearly has signs of burnout as a physician, who clearly is not well educated about addiction, about what to do, and who is clearly working in isolation as a solo practitioner. We have too many Dr. Davises like out there who are trying to do their best but have real world problems and don't work in a system like our UCLA health system where we feel safe and protected. Thirdly, I think about Lawrence, the empire of pain, if you will, and how he built it from the ground up, and how we see this in America, capitalism and combined with just incredible innovation, but unfortunately too much. And probably the most unsettling part of that is the lawsuit case where the state asked for $30 million. Now, I was involved in an opioid case where the state asked for $15 billion. So the figures are way off, but it's the principle that matters. And I think just the idea that how do you create a medication that for a big number of people relieves suffering, right? And we can't forget that opioid prescription pills really do work when effectively delivered in the hands of doctors and nurse practitioners and monitoring correctly. So I think about those three things. And I have something about your character, about I forget her name. What's her name again? Allison. About how she needed where to go. And a smart woman, an intelligent woman who wants to do the right thing and raise the family and still involve a co-parent with her ex, right? And doesn't know where to go, doesn't know where to call, has been through this. This wasn't her first rodeo going through, Michael's addiction, right? And I was thinking about that evening. You talk about a heck of a day they all went through, right? What could Allison have done differently right then in that moment? Should she have insisted, no, Michael, we're going to the emergency room. I'm going to wait for you until you get admitted into a bed like at UCLA. That's one option. Not very practical, right? Number two, could Allison have called for her family and friends to come over and say, we need to support Michael through the night because this is a medical emergency. I don't know what to do. Maybe. But my sense was she was alone that night with Michael and the son. There was no one else around. I don't know if there was another remarried or someone else, whatnot. But you just want to reach out and you want to be next to Allison to say, hey, we can get through this together. She wants to be with him together. So just a few elements. I think that's the empowerment to family members who are going through this, is that, Allison, you're not at fault for this addiction. You're not at fault for the tragic outcome that came of it. But there are things that could have been available for Allison that night that potentially could have been helpful for Michael. So.
Well, you two are the experts. What would you, I'm certainly not, and I don't know, maybe we have more doctors in the audience, but if not, what would you both recommend? Because I do think a lot of people feel helpless. There aren't easy resources made available in situations like this. And I think particularly, as you mentioned, depends on what kind of health insurance you have, because going to the ER could bankrupt you. So when we know that we live in a country where most Americans are $400, a $400 emergency bill away from bankruptcy, I see why that feels really impossible to a lot of people. So what would you offer because I do think some of the important things we can do in rooms like this is get a few calls to action and then maybe help to spread the word. And so what do you want to arm everyone in this audience and myself with in terms of information that we can go home with and know, should we be in a situation like that or have a friend who's in a situation like that in their family, what should we tell them to do?
I'll let Dr. Hansen take that, then I'll finish up with whatever she doesn't get to. Because the other part that the film shows so well is that even if people want to get help, they got to wait. They got to stand in line, they call somebody, and if you're in opioid withdrawal, that is not something you can wait on. Mm-hmm. That is an emergency. That is a medical emergency, but ultimately it is treatable. I thought the depiction of his opiate withdrawal was very, very well done because it's scientifically accurate, and that's exactly how it plays out. In no other film, with the exception of Train Spotting, does it show it with that level of specificity. But Dr. Hansen,
Bryan, you said that.
give us your roadmap, and I'll give you my roadmap.
I've been sitting here fantasizing that it's not too late to have a set of talkbacks and discussions after the film. I don't know if that's been planned already. But what my fantasy would be is that opioid prevention workers, harm reductionists, as well as treaters in the field of addiction medicine would participate in talkbacks where really the question is, how can we expand the arms of social support and medical support for people who really need it? Because the truth is that there isn't enough there now. And you can pick up from this film how important social as well as medical support is. So the medical support was alluded to in overdose prevention with the Narcan kit that was used, and I'm so glad that Dr. Fong brought a kit up on stage. The truth is that even that basic technology is not very available still, and there's so much more that we could do to make it widely available. That's going to require more than helpful individual hints, even though everyone needs to be educated about Narcan and where to get it. But we need to provide the places where people can get it. And we also need to provide places where people can come together for the kinds of social as well as medical support that are critical for overdose prevention as well as recovery, the whole spectrum. So that's what I'm fantasizing about. And certainly we could offer up, and I hope that Dr. Fong does this, advice for individuals who are struggling. But until there is systemic action and people who are directly affected coming together to build more organizations of support, it's not going to be accessible to the people who need it in the time frame where they need it. And we should look to examples of where people have successfully come together to create that. There are many of them, and tell those stories as well. One last thing I'll leave you with is the power of story and the power of the arts. I just want to commend you for bringing your talents into this realm. As you mentioned, you had to sacrifice yourself. This was not the kind of film that is, as you put it, going to pay the mortgage. And so it's critical that we bring artists and storytellers into this realm, because we can create as many statistics and studies as we'd like, but it's really the power of the human story and the artistry of the storyteller that is going to lead people to come together into the groups that will be needed to provide what individuals need in the way of social and medical support to get out of this and to keep themselves from overdosing. So I just want to thank you again for the sacrifice that you've given us, actually, as an artist, to bring this to public attention. Thank you.
That's
Are we
very
going to take
generous.
some Q&A
Thank
from
you.
audience? Or
Yes.
Yeah, okay, so I'm going to give my roadmap. We'll take some Q&A and get some photos and do the whole thing. Perfect. So the opioid crisis is now we'll call about 15 years in the making. We know a couple of things have happened over the last generation and a half. Number one, prescription opioids are actually going down. Doctors are learning more. Doctors are tightening up, quote, their prescription of opiate. Pill mills are being closed. We have new medications that work. Suboxone, methadone, naltrexone. These are medications that can be very effective for treatment of opioid use disorder. We have Narcan, naloxone that is available. This was $40 over the counter at CVS. You don't need a doctor's prescription to get it. And it's like an epinephrine pen for the mind and brain. So it really should be something that we carry around and keep in our cabinets. These are things we can do right now. But so much has to start with education, because the problem with our opioid crisis in the next 15, 20 years isn't, unfortunately, in my opinion, prescription pills. It's fentanyl. And that's where this film starts to touch on, is that when the pills run out, people will then go to the street and use things that are in the street that, again, create the death. Mm-hmm. Michael's death is not because he was constantly using street. He used one time, the first time he used from the street. And this is exactly why it's accurate, because the fentanyl that's in the street supply for a guy like him who probably had mild to moderate opioid use, not severe, mild to moderate, but he used a very powerful amount of opiates he's not used to. That's why he succumbed and died tragically. So our roadmap, again, starts with education at all levels, from high school, grade school, high school, colleges, undergrad, medical school, all the way up. It also starts with accountability from all the folks who are actually supplying opioids to the world. The lawsuit I was involved with, the lawyer said, oversupply and people die. That's why we have the opioid crisis from the pills. So as you contain and slow down the supply from the prescription opioids, that's okay, but how do we stop the supply from the fentanyl side? Very, very difficult. So the education part is super critical, the discussion part. And I think about, again, a case like Michael. How do we stop that from happening? Or even the baseball player at the end, how do we stop that from happening? Or the doctor who, again, is filling out the community because she's desperate to make money. We stop that from happening by identifying an earlier stage and being okay to ask for help. Routinely, those three junctions, Michael, Dr. Davis, and the company, nobody asked for help along the way to say, this is not the way my life or my career or the way my company is envisioning. So by the time they start to think about it, it's too late. By the time people call me and get an appointment with me, it's really severe. Mm-hmm. How do we get people like Michael within the first month? Or think about the baseball player who had the surgeon, and he said immediately he felt something. So one thing we don't ask for physicians is to say, from that first prescription of opiates I gave you, how did that make you feel? What did it do for you? Not just pain, but what did it do into your head? We don't teach our doctors to think like that. So we have a lot of things like that. So again, I want to highlight, this was a tremendous movie. Thank you for doing this work. And thank you for going out in the public. And hopefully, as you come across, and this is my call, if you come across anyone at these movie screenings who say, I have a loved one, or I've been touched by this, how do I get some help? We can give you and Bryan community resources, both either nationally or locally, wherever you go, to get people in touch with local treatment programs. So that's something that we can offer for you.
Is there a national resource like that you would recommend for all of us to know about in the room, a website
there's not like 1-800 number, but there are organizations like our American Academy of Addiction Psychiatry, mm-hmm. American Society of Addiction Medicine, LA County, every county now, because of the opioid crisis and some of the money that's flown back into communities, mm-hmm. where a lot of those lawsuit money goes to is establishing things like overdose education, treatment systems, access to care, telehealth access. So that's where I like to think from an optimistic standpoint compared to where we were about 5-6 years ago. We do have more things to offer. And so those are things we can give you in the film, access to those things.
So, Dr. Fong, I want to also add to that list peer support. I think in medical spaces we don't talk enough about the social technologies that must accompany our medical technologies. And one of the things that the opioid crisis has fostered is many more local organizations that train and place peer support workers, people who had lived experience of opioid use dependence, so substance use dependence, who have recovered and or are actually using harm reduction services in a way that allows them to function and keeps them safe from overdose. So I want to put that out there because the real heroes that I've run across in this story of the opioid crisis are people who have dedicated themselves to helping others get through and survive the same experiences that they've had. And that kind of peer support is critical, especially also to overcoming the stigma that we saw in this film kept people from asking for the help that they need. So we, as clinical practitioners, as medical professionals, really need to work in partnership with people who are working in these peer-led organizations and movements. I think that's really how we're going to get much further into communities and to encourage people to step forward, to look for the help that they need. So I add that as a technology really alongside naloxone. I think we need all of the above in tandem.
And one thing I would like to touch on, you mentioned the dangers of fentanyl being mixed into so many narcotics that people are getting a hold of. I think I would really be remiss to not touch on the fact that we're at a college. College is the place where so many young people experiment with drugs and alcohol. And one of the things that I've seen to be the most I guess I was maybe perhaps the most surprised by it, but I've also seen it be the most effective, is a group of women in their sort of mid-30s who all grew up in rave culture, who were like, this is super dangerous for women, and now people are dying of overdoses at dance parties. And they started this collective, they go by Rave Moms, and they teach young people like how to access kits to test drugs, and they teach you what to watch out for at these sort of places, and they give you this sort of peer support of like, look, we're not going to judge you. You could be the sober person at the dance party or the person who wants to like have whatever journey you want to go on. We just want you to live through it. And I think when we talk about the way we want to redesign systems so people don't wind up in addiction, so they don't wind up being harmed, like, great, yes, let's build a better world. And what are the resources we're particularly going to give people in the interim? So is it we should push people to perhaps get Narcan and keep it in their first aid kits just in case? What a revolutionary thing would happen if you had that in the glove box of your car and you came up on an emergency on a street corner. And I think we really have to have frank discussions with young people. Kids trying to get study drugs from their friends at college are dying because those drugs aren't what they say they are. So I think we really also need to have frank discussions with students and young people about the risks that what seems like a fun night might really look like for them, that's the sort of thing that could end their life, and how to teach them how to be safer and smarter in this world that, blessedly, none of us we didn't grow up with it like this. So I'm hoping that getting clear about how easy it is to have like one wrong experience, or how a shoulder surgery can change your whole life and perhaps end it. I hope we can have more frank discussions too about the resources that currently exist to keep people safe, and then how we can do the longer work of the system building and the community support and the legislation change to hopefully ensure a little bit more protection and perhaps better outcomes in the sort of public health world in general.
So well said. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, Sophia Bush. I think we do have time for taking a couple questions from the audience.
Yes, we're going to be passing the mic around for questions if anybody would like to ask a question. But before we do that, I really want to thank you all, Dr. Fong, Sophia Bush, Dr. Helena Hansen, for this really informative and enlightening conversation. And thank you to all of you for the privilege of your time. We do have a resource guide out in the foyer that we put together when we did an event for the teen mental health crisis for parents. And it's pretty comprehensive, so take a copy on your way out, because there are some good resources that Tim helped us put together, and Dr. Eric Chung from the Resnick Hospital. So they're good, really good community resources. Okay, questions? Right over there.
Are there good Samaritan laws on the books to protect a civilian like me when misadministering the product that you have on your stage to someone who may not need it, but I give it to him anyway, or I may cause further harm or damage to that person by having it use that without any prior knowledge or how to use it?
What an interesting question. I came to UCLA from NYU 3 years ago, and so I can't definitively answer that question for California. In New York State, yes, there are Good Samaritan laws that sheltered people or protected people who tried to intervene in case of an overdose, including medication administration. Unfortunately, that didn't have as broad an effect as people would like because law enforcement doesn't always practice the principle behind Good Samaritan laws, which were really designed for people who were involved in the drug use in one way or the other and who otherwise would have run away from an overdose case because they'd be afraid of prosecution themselves. So it hasn't had exactly the intended effect in New York State. But maybe someone in the audience could tell you for California if a similar set of laws is in effect here.
We have a lawyer, Paul Bergman. Where are you, Paul? He may have left. There he is. Paul Bergman is a lawyer. He's also faculty here. He's also a board member at Bet Shuva Residential Treatment Program. So let's put it together for Paul. I don't know if you have anything to add to that. I really don't have much on that Good Samaritan law sort of things.
I'm not an expert. I'm not an expert. We do have a Good Samaritan law, and I don't know if there's a specific aspect for administering drugs, but basically it allows a reasonable response to what seems to be an emergency situation. Now, if you go beyond, it has to be reasonable, your action. So there is always a potential liability, but we do have a basic Good Samaritan law that would allow people to act when there seems to be an emergency going on.
Thank you for that.
And just to clarify, I have never heard of anyone being held legally liable for attempting to rescue from an overdose with a naloxone kit. So if anyone in the audience has ever heard of that, please raise your hand. But I think for those of you who might consider participating in rescuing someone, I've never, ever heard a story of that.
I would agree with that. And again, it goes back to that whole education and destigmatizing that, this idea that I'm going to administer a prescription drug to somebody against their will while they're asleep. And you add in, if I'm going to inject them with a needle, that sounds even worse, right? But that's not how naloxone is administered. It's a nasal spray or it's an auto-injector. There are no needles that are available in our commercially available forms of naloxone. Now, someone's running around and just injecting people because they think they may overdose and with intent to harm, that of course is a crime, and that falls under that. But I think it goes back to, again, this grander vision that we still have some fear over getting involved in the case of substance use or intoxication or overdose or drugs or some sort of underground scene like that. And I really want us to get away from that and say, let's get back to common sense and doing things that make sense instead of driving past and not making eye contact with people. All right, maybe one or two more questions. One more, according to Vicky. Okay.
First of all, I thought it was a very powerful film. And one of the things at the end you were talking about are resources. And I was wondering if it's possible to put something up there. But one of the things is SAMHSA's National Helpline. And that's Substance Abuse Mental Health Services Administration, 1-800-662-HELP. It has, you can just Google it. Or even this 988, right? Someone's in crisis, and you talked about also having peers to talk to, right? So in that moment, right, that moment before he goes out, he's not in treatment, he doesn't have a sponsor or something like that. Just having something available to call and something especially powerful in the film to list those resources at the end, I think is always helpful.
We do have that on the sheet that you can pick up on your way out because we're always asked for the community resources, and it is really important to have that on hand.
And if I may, I think something that is really powerful to remind ourselves of is that a lot of us have that feeling, this is a crisis, this is a national epidemic, this is a global issue, what am I going to do? And we, for better or worse, I think that this is where the better comes in, live in this age of the most digital connection we've ever had. Every single person in this room, I would wager, if not 99% of you, has some form of social media, whether you use Instagram or Facebook to connect with your families. The sheet that's in the lobby here, each one of us can take a photo of on our phone and post. And we forget sometimes that, we may not have the power of world leaders, but we do have the power of our platforms. And you'll reach the 5 people in your family better than I ever could. And I think to use those resources for good is incredibly powerful. And I like to think that if everyone who sees this movie could get a resource number, website, or sheet in front of 5 people, like the ripple effect of that has the potential to be 5 million people if 1 million people see the movie. So we have to, I think, remember that when we come upon information or great teachers or great resources, that if we share them, we can really help the people we care about most. And so, I'm not going to say like the call to action, but like maybe the call to action for all of us should be to do that tonight. And then we would have definitely left here with an impact.
Well said. I wonder if it's too late to embed a QRS code at the end of each screening with some national and local resources.
It's a brilliant idea, and if we all go home and do that, we will make a difference. So thank you for sharing that. Thank you, everybody, panelists, all of you in the audience, for the privilege of your time, for sharing this incredible experience with us as a community. And I think we all learned a lot this evening. So thank you. Have a good evening. Stay safe. Stay well.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Vicki.
Yeah, wouldn't have missed it.
I know you were